Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Events Program Remote. We are live from my basement, Kathy's house, Catherine's house, separate houses. We're social distance baking tonight, and we are very pleased that they will be presenting Rage Baking, the transformative power of flour, fury, and women's voices. Gibson's Bookstore event program is sustained by book sales. I'm going to drop a link to the books purchase link in the chat bar. And also we are shipping right now, 99-cent shipping on purchases $20 and over. And we have signed book plates, which we will be tucking right in those purchases with us tonight. So tonight, please join me in welcoming Kathy Gunst, food journalist and baker, and Katherine Alford, food goddess extraordinaire. Please, our audience members, please do pop questions into the question box. I will be keeping an eye on that. But for now, take it away, Kathy. Take it away, Katherine.
Okay, we are thrilled to be here. We were supposed to be in Concord, New Hampshire tonight, and this is pretty great. This is our very first time playing with this technology, so please bear with us. This is a brand new experience, really for everyone, although I feel like I live on Zoom. Spend a lot of time here, so I've gotten used to looking at my hair grow in, and it's all good. I'm thrilled to be with you, Katherine, even though—
Yes, I'm thrilled to be here. Kathy is in Maine and I am here in New York, and it's pretty cool to be able to like prep all day long and then go to a book event that is national with people in California, and welcome to Atlanta and DC and Cape Cod. It's pretty awesome to be able to do that. And we're gonna do an actual cooking demo. And then we're gonna talk about Rage Baking. We're here to answer all your questions about your baking and also about the book. And we're gonna get just started right away with the cooking part of it. So we have two fabulous cameramen, which are our husbands, who will be doing the camera work for us so you can actually see what we're doing. So the first thing we're gonna make a galette, which is from the book on page, I think it's 142. But this pie recipe, this pie dough recipe can be used for a myriad of different things. For galettes, which is basically a free-form pie, you don't need any special equipment. You can use it for a pie, you can use it for empanadas, you can use it for anything. And we know in this COVID time, it doesn't have any yeast in it. So that's also super, super important. And also, it's something that can be part of your repertoire at any time. There is a small cat that is here making noise. That's not me meowing. So if you're trying to figure out what that noise is, that's Opal. She's joined the demo as well. First off, one of the things that we discovered when we were doing this book was how you measure flour, right? It's the most basic thing in the world. But the thing we really want to advocate is that people get a scale. It's a simple thing. It came up between Kathy and I because we were testing our recipes, some in New York, some in Maine, and we were getting different results. And I had to ask the personal question of Kathy, like, how do you measure your flour? And we realized that for consistency, having a scale was great. And I love it because you turn it on and you go to a unit. We do it in grams, which is the most accurate. And I love it because I can just put my bowl right on the scale. In my glass bowl, I can see it, and then I just measure all my ingredients right into here. So for the pie dough, I'm gonna do 162, I think it is.
180.
180, okay, thank you, Kathy. 180, which is 1.5 cups, and I can see it right there. Hold on. There we go. It's very accurate, and the thing is, if you didn't have a scale, the way we suggest that you do measure, because if you just go right into the bowl, into this and pack it in, you're gonna pack in your flour, and you don't wanna do that. So for this, you wanna just take it and scoop it into your dry measuring cup and level it off the top. So that would be the most accurate. So I have my flour in the bowl. I'm gonna add a pinch of salt, really key to bring out the flavors. 2 tablespoons of sugar, which helps tenderize the dough. And then I'm just going to whisk it together. That basic thing right there. And then I have my butter. I've cut up some of it already. And this is a tool that we use all the time throughout the book. It's a pastry cutter or scraper, and it's the best. You can just cut right the butter into small pieces. And that's really important, to have the butter in nice small pieces. Now I'm doing this by hand, so you don't need, this is God's best gift here, you know, to make pie dough, is to use your hands. So I drop this right on in and then toss the butter lightly with the flour. You want the butter to get coated with the flour first. And then the whole idea is when you're making a pie dough, and all the things that people talk about is tender and flaky and all those things, it's all about the size of the butter or the fat. So if you also, some people ask about, you know, I don't eat butter, I'm vegan, whatever solid fat you use, whether it's shortening or a substitute, coconut solid at room temperature. And so I start to mix this in. And the whole idea of what you want to do is to both coat the flour with the butter, and then also to have these little pieces all the way throughout. And I'm mixing it in, pressing it in. And in a lot of recipes, you'll see work the butter in till it's the size of beans or coarse meal. Some people will use a pastry scraper, which kind of is the original food processor. And the idea is that you want to cut in the butter in small pieces. An old-fashioned way of doing it is to literally cut it in with a knife. So people will, so all of these are cool, no special equipment. You don't need anything like this. This is as old-fashioned and as classic as it can be. And you can see, I'm a hand person. I love using my hands and getting in there and pressing in. And what I also look for, and you should start to see this, is that the flour actually gets, it goes from being white to being a little bit yellow. And that means that the butter is now coating the flour. And the whole idea when you're making a good flaky pie crust is that there's the flour that's going to be moistened and these nuggets of butter that when it bakes, they melt into the flour and give it its flavor, but leave that little pocket behind. And that's what those solid pieces of butter are going to be. So that looks good to me. It's kind of powdery, but there's still some nice big pieces. And now I'm going to moisten it. And I'm going to use some water. And I need 2 to 3 tablespoons of water. But then there's a little secret that I'm going to add. And this isn't just my COVID stay-at-home cocktail hour thing.
Yeah, right.
This is adding a little bit of vodka. And the whole reason why I add the vodka is that it is moist. It will moisten the flour, but it will not activate the gluten in the same way that water does. And we hear a lot about gluten these days, gluten-free, you know, but in making bread, you want gluten. It creates that great sort of web structure, like pretend this is a loaf of bread. It would hold, the gluten is what's holding the rise and all the air in there. In a pie dough, you want just enough gluten to hold it together, but not enough to make it tough. So by combining it with a little bit of the vodka, I moisten it, but I don't activate the gluten. So now I'm going to start to bring this together.
Does the vodka change the flavor of the crust, Catherine?
No, it doesn't. And that's why it's like using, for a neutral crust, I'll use vodka. Sometimes if I want, like if I'm making an apple pie, I might even use some, like an apple brandy or something like that. So you can play around with it. I have absolutely done that. Make a cherry pie, use a cherry vodka to get a little bit of the flavor. So you'll start to see this come together, and I kind of press it together, and you see, I can see there now the pieces of butter the moistened flour will come together, and I just press this together. And then that will, I'll press all this together, and then I'm going to refrigerate it, and then for at least an hour, and then roll it out. Now, Kathy is going to show you how she does it in the food processor.
So
Yeah.
I am going to ask first, we do have a quick question here of from Ellie. Is this an easy enough recipe to cut the pastry in half since they're quarantined in a group of 2? They don't need dessert for 6?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I have made this galette for my husband and I, and it was supposed to be for 4 to 6, and we ate the whole thing. So it holds very well, but absolutely, I've had leftover dough and I've turned it into empanadas. You can double this recipe, you can half it. If you were gonna half it, what I would do is bring it together like this and then divide it in half, and then you'll have 2 and put 1 in the freezer, and then you'll have your dough when you need it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Freeze half of it. It will freeze beautifully for 6 months. I have pastry in my freezer all the time for that last minute. Well, when people used to stop by, and when we used to have parties and you needed pastry in your freezer, but
Right.
when you get the urge, then you don't have to go through it. So I am really glad that everybody got to see you do it by hand, because it's really important to see that process. I am going to use my food processor for 2 reasons. One is, obviously if you have one, it's very fast. And the second thing is that when my hands get very warm, I tend to run very hot, and the heat of my hands sometimes breaks down the butter fat. So this way I don't touch it. So what I have in here is everything you just saw Katherine do. 180 grams of flour, I have the sugar, I have the salt, and I put the vodka in, and I only put in 1.5 tablespoons of water, because I want you to be able to see, hopefully, that it's ready when the pastry starts to pull away from the sides of the bowl. So I'm going to turn it on for a brief noisy second. And it's kind of crumbly there, and it's starting to hold together, and it's starting to pull away from the sides of the bowl, but it's not one solid piece. That shows me, I'm going to add just the tiniest bit of ice water here, but I am really just about, yeah, there we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the dough out, and I'm going to dump it on, you can use a sheet of plastic. This is recyclable beeswax, any kind of, just trying to be super conscious about how much plastic we use in the kitchen. But here's our dough. I'm going to pull it out, and you'll see there's little crumbly pieces here. That's fine. I'm going to use the plastic to help me pull it together into one shape. So if this were a sheet of saran wrap, I'm just molding it and shaping it into a ball so that all those little bits hold together. And there you can see it's really fast in the food processor. Is one method better than the other? Not at all. So I'm working on a lightly floured surface here, and I'm going to take my dough, and what I'm going to do is wrap it up in here and chill it for about 15-20 minutes. So that's going to go in the fridge. And then, miracle of miracles, I have one that I made earlier. This was actually in my freezer. I made it last week. So it's just chilled still. It's not quite room temperature, but it's a nice firm disc there. I'm taking a rolling pin and I'm flouring it well. And what I'm going to do is use pressure on my rolling pin to try to roll this out into a circle about 14 inches. And because it's quite chilled, it's moving a little bit slowly. If it were, the more it comes to room temperature, the easier it is to work with. But you'll see I'm rotating it. And the reason I'm doing that is that I want to keep the thickness of the circle as uniform as possible. So parts of it are very thick right now, and I'm just going to work in one direction to make, and I also can flip it from side to side to make sure that it gets an equal distribution of flour, and I have more flour if it starts to stick. It's a beautiful dough because it's so easy to work with. And that butter, if you can eat dairy, it's just so delicious. This is one of my favorite crusts, and I really love the trick of the vodka. And no, you don't taste it, but if you're sensitive to alcohol or like to stay away from it, just add a little bit more butter. I'm sorry, a little bit more water, but not a lot. You just want to moisten it. Having a ruler in the kitchen. People often see it in my kitchen and they're like, what do you use a ruler for? I measure baked goods all the time. I want this about 14 inches. So I'm going to roll it a little bit bigger.
What thickness are you looking for? Is that like a good wool blanket or?
No, it's a bit thinner than that, but not paper thin at all. Can you see it all there? It's, I can still hold it without it falling apart. I'm really looking for that 14-inch circle, and then I'll know, so I'm at about 13 and a half. So I am pretty much there. And I'm working quickly again because my hands get so warm and I don't want the heat of my fingers to break this pastry down. I've got a cookie sheet here. These are fabulous. You get them from King Arthur Flour. They're pre-cut sheets of parchment paper. You could use a Silpatz sheet. You could just use the baking sheet. I'm going to put my pastry right there. And that is going to go in the refrigerator for 15 minutes. But for right now, I'm going to put it to the side. So very exciting week. The seasons are changing, and my neighbors down the street had rhubarb, and they were incredibly gracious and let me come pick rhubarb. So here's what I did. I took their gorgeous rhubarb and I chopped it into thin pieces. And it's not important. I don't want to make them too thin because rhubarb falls apart. And I took 1/4 cup of flour and 1/4 cup of water, and I just brought it to a simmer, let it really simmer. And then I threw in this chopped rhubarb.
Kathy, was that, I'm sorry, did you put flour or sugar in with the rhubarb?
I'm sorry, sugar. Did I say flour?
You did.
Okay, no, I did about 1/4 cup of sugar and 1/4 cup of water, so like a sugar syrup. And I brought it to a boil and let it cook a little bit to thicken up and get sweeter. I added my rhubarb, and that's what you're seeing here. That's what these beautiful juices are. And then I added the strawberries. These are not local yet, but in some parts of the country, you're going to be getting them already. And hopefully you're near a farmer's market or have a garden. I add the strawberries to the rhubarb and I toss it in that fruity, sugary syrup. And this is my filling. And you can make this hours ahead of time. You can, in the book, we do it with summer berries, blueberries, strawberries, blackberries, raspberries. As the seasons change, your filling can change. Catherine's going to do a savory version of this, but this to me is the epitome of spring. That first local fruit or vegetable, as rhubarb is, and strawberries. It's just so beautiful. One other trick, I took the rhubarb. Usually you chop it, but I took it because it's so fresh, it's almost juicy. Where's my knife? The cat stole it. Okay, there it is. And I made thin strips. This is just cool to have the fruit in 2 different textures, and it's going to just be this sort of nice accent on the galette. And here it is when I cooked it. I just threw it in with the syrup at the very end. So let me show you what's going to happen. I really hope that you're getting how simple this is. You whirl up some pastry, you roll it into a circle. It's very forgiving pastry. If it's a little thick on one side, thin on another, it's going to work. It's going to be fine. So here's our circle. I'm going to spoon the filling into the middle, but I'm going to leave a good 2 inches free on the outside, and you'll see why. And I want all those beautiful juices. Oh, I did add a little cornstarch. I forgot about that because you can see it's a bit thin and I want it to thicken up. So then I'm going to take my rhubarb stripes, as I call them, and just make a very simple, decorative, kind of a star. You can just have fun with this. This is not precision baking. The whole thing about Rage Baking, the book, is that it was written for home cooks and home bakers, and even written for people who feel very insecure about their baking. This is very straightforward. It's just fun. You see, it's pretty. All of a sudden, I look like a fancy baker, and all I did was cut the rhubarb in 2 different ways. So the reason we leave these flaps open is that we're going to tuck them in. And you can make this look neater by taking the top of it and just tucking it under there. And again, with this one, tuck, just press so that it holds that liquid in. It's already juicing up, which is, as far as I'm concerned, a great sign, because we're going to have a very juicy, beautiful galette. I'm just sort of tucking and folding, and then I'm just tucking that under. You don't even have to do that part, but it just gives it a cleaner, more professional look. Again, I'm just pressing my last bit. Now this will go into the fridge for 15, 20 minutes. You just want that pastry to really chill again. If it's warm and it goes into the oven, it tends to just fall apart. And then these juices will also, they'll get a bit thicker. So that's going into the fridge. And then watch this. Oh my goodness, I think it's done. Look at that. Okay, this is the beautiful view of what it looks like when it comes out. So I baked it for 15 minutes. I took it out and I brushed it just with a little pastry brush with heavy cream. Gives it a beautiful glaze. You could use a beaten egg. You could use nothing. It would be absolutely fine. I am going to put this right onto my serving plate. And depending on how your parchment paper is, these can be used more than once. So I've got a beautiful galette here. If you wanted, you could sprinkle it with a little bit of confectioner's sugar. That's in a just a light strainer here. Just give it that little snowy beauty. And I just can't tell you that this smells like my garden, and it smells like spring. And I haven't had dinner yet, and I think I'm going to dive right into it. But I'll bring it to you, Catherine, for the savory version.
Well, and here, everyone, coming back to New York here, this is the savory version that I did, and I used, this is a variation on one of the ones from, oh, let's move the camera. Can everyone see it? There we go.
Beautiful.
So, can you see this, Robert? Yeah, there we go. So this is a savory one, and I used apples and pancetta. Basically, I just opened my refrigerator. It could be bacon. I had an apple. I had some herbs, you know, rosemary, thyme. I had some cheese, and I rolled it out exactly like Kathy did, brushed it with a little bit of mustard, and then built the apples on the inside with a little bit of the cooked pancetta, baked it. And one of the things I'm sort of obsessive about, really obsessive about, well, yes, as we worked on this book, we discovered a lot of our obsessions, is that you cook the pastry enough. Like this little dark spot here, I have a friend who calls it the French brown. Just think about toast, you know, basically pastry dough is like, it's like bread, and it's flour and water with a little bit of butter, and that the more it's toasted, the more the flavor develops, that toastedness of the butter, the toastiness of the flour. So you can sometimes think that it's done. Just let it go a little bit longer, and it's going to taste that much better. Really, just
I tend to always take it out too early. So I look for the fruit to be bubbling and tender, but I also look for the pastry, as Catherine said, for that really rich brown. Look how yours is so high, because you have much more filling in it than I do, I would say.
Yeah, I really, and this is just 2 apples that I just built up on there. And in the book, we have the berry one, and then we also have the an apple one. This is savory, and it can be done. I mean, having a galette, I mean, having pie dough in this is like, you can make a really simple dinner in really no time. And this with the salad, I don't know. Do we want a slice? I'm going to slice.
Starving.
Do you want a slice?
I think everyone in the audience should get a slice.
Okay, I just want you to know, as I was cutting into it, I heard that crunch, that that sound of the flake, which is those big pieces of butter melting into the flour. Here we go.
Simultaneously cutting. I also wanted to mention that with the strawberry rhubarb or apple pear or whatever berries or summer and spring fruit you use, you can serve this plain. You can see that it's very beautiful on its own. You could add a dollop of creme fraiche or sour cream or Greek yogurt or vanilla ice cream.
Yes.
There you go.
Elizabeth, are you ready for your slice?
Yes, please.
Okay, here you go. Here you go.
Two at a time.
Oh, thank you so much.
It's
It smells really good. Yeah, and then I suppose you could have a savory one and then also have a sweet one. But we really wanted to show you how adaptable this recipe is. I've done savory
and say that the one that I made with coconut oil instead of butter because my family is tragically dairy free. And I made mine, I pulled a package of frozen spinach from my freezer and a tomato that was I knew it only had a day or two. I don't know how well that looks terrible on camera, but I have a tomato and spinach galette and I'm gonna eat it. So here we go.
There we go. So that's just, okay, that is the cooking segment of this virtual book event. And then we're happy to answer your questions about baking, and also Kathy and I are going to talk about how this whole book came about of rage baking and what rage baking is, and and this book.
Yeah, I guess I'll start. Boy, the concept of rage baking goes back a long, long way, possibly to the Revolutionary War, when women did not have the right to vote and they were in the kitchen. Women have always expressed themselves through their kitchen. And back then they made these cakes called election cakes, which were very dense, fruit-heavy cakes that they made for election day. So there they were, unable to voice their opinion, unable to cast a vote. So they went into the kitchen and they baked. And there was rage involved. And this goes on throughout history. During the civil rights movement, you will hear quite a bit about secret kitchens. And these were kitchens where women baked to raise funds for activists and marches and Martin Luther King. And again, there was this rage and there was activism. And then we can fast forward to today, specifically the fall of 2018 during the Kavanaugh hearings, which I became fairly obsessed with. I listened to those hearings from the minute they started till the minute they ended. And I found myself each night in my kitchen baking, and not just baking a single pie or a single batch of cookies, but in one night, a cake, cookies, and brownies. And then the next day I listened to the hearing again. And I didn't understand at the time what it was all about, because I am a good baker, but baking's not really my go-to. I'm more of a savory cook. Long story short, I believe in retrospect that baking got me through this very difficult, angry, sort of rageful time, because it's so much about following the rules and about the science. And baking, if you do what it tells you, and I promise you these recipes in this book are so well tested, thanks to my dear friend who is a stickler for accuracy, it rewards you greatly. And baking's very much about community and building community. If you think about baking a cake, it's very much about, here's a cake, is it a wedding, is it a birthday? I mean, a cake went to the Supreme Court. So we see baking and emotions and anger and rage show up all over the place. And now there's a huge trend you see on social media of blank cakes and cupcakes and cookies as canvases for messages. You'll see hashtag get your hands off my body, hashtag bake the patriarchy, on and on. So we put together a book. Katherine and I have known each other for quite a while, and we thought, let's get a group of the most talented women, writers, screenwriters, bakers, food writers, and let's see what it means to them to talk about rage baking.
So when Kathy and I, we were talking about this through the Kavanaugh hearings and the role that baking was playing, but also it was like activism. And we knew between Kathy and I, we have, decades of food experience, whether as a chef, and I used to run the test kitchen at the Food Network. And Kathy's written, I think, 16 cookbooks at this point. So, I mean, we're like, okay, if we're going to do a cookbook, like we did not want to do a traditional cookbook and just the two of us together. And we sent out a really wide net. We knew that to make this book, both it can be a pro-social project, which it is, a portion of the proceeds will go to Emily's List, but also to make that connection that women have voices and that the kitchen is an important place for community, as Kathy said, and transformation. You take something as simple as that butter and flour, and then it transforms into something like this galette, which is a real metaphor, we hope, for political change. So we cast a really wide net, and it was an amazing process. We sent emails out to women we knew, women we didn't know, and we knew that we wanted a large community of different kinds of women, different life experiences, African American, Asian American, Palestinian American, gay, straight, queer, trans, the entire, a lived experience. And it was kind of amazing, the response we got. We'd send the emails out, and sometimes literally within hit send, and then right back, the answer was, hell yeah, tell me what I can do. People got it viscerally that, rage baking was something that they wanted to participate in. And I make the analogy that, for 15, 20 years ago, it was all about comfort food. And what is comfort food? We all know what that is. And now we're seeing rage baking. In the Times last week, it was talking about, making sourdough or making focaccia, and that just like how we that physical experience of working with dough is very cathartic and also satisfying and delicious. As I'm saying this.
When we started putting this book together, that it wasn't going to be a traditional cookbook with just a collection of recipes from all these women. We decided we wanted essays, we wanted interviews, we wanted illustrations, we wanted vintage photography and new photography. Really quickly, the book has on the chapter openers some very old black and white photographs that were taken by my mother-in-law, Nancy Rudolph. The opening spread of the book shows one of the very first women's marches in the US in 1961, right in front of the White House. These women are wearing fur coats and holding balloons. And this, I believe, was called the, I'm blanking out now.
The Peace March.
The Peace March. And then she went to women's marches in front of the Pentagon. So there are these, it's a wonderful tribute to my mother-in-law, who we lost a few years ago and was so talented. And then there's this gorgeous new photography by the very talented Jarell Guy, who's a young photographer in Texas. But when we decided we wanted essays, we sent out a prompt to writers that we really respected. And the prompt was, what do the words rage and baking elicit for you? And what does the term rage baking mean for you? And as soon as I sent out the emails, I called Katherine and I'm like, damn, I think I messed up, because we're gonna get 15 of the exact same essays. And of course I was forgetting that every woman comes into this world and walks through this life in such a unique and different perspective. And the essays could not be more different. They range from Tess Rafferty, a screenwriter in LA, who wrote a hilarious essay called "The Revolution Will Be Catered." And then there are incredibly moving essays. Halle Bay Ramdeen wrote an essay about being a young girl and driving from Albany, New York, to her grandmother's in North Carolina, and the foods that her grandmother would serve to her family when they arrived, and how as she grew up, she understood that her grandmother, excuse me, was feeding the family, but also was full of rage. And she tries to understand that as a young woman now. Do you want to tell about Elle Simone's poem?
Yeah, there's a wonderful woman in in Massachusetts, Elle Simone. And she and I worked together at Food Network, and she now works at America's Test Kitchen. and also runs a program called She Chef, which mentors women of color in the food business. And I reached out to Elle, and she was totally into it. And she was like, okay, I'm going to send you this recipe adapted from her grandmother, her great-grandmother. And I was like, great, wonderful. It's I have to tell you, it's one of the most extraordinary lemon pound cakes that you're ever going to make. But she also then said, you know, and I think I'll send you a poem. And I sort of stopped, and I was like, well, oh, I didn't know what that meant. You know, it's not the traditional head note. And then she sent us the poem, and it's a poem to Mother Ann, her great-grandmother, and her process of how she used food when she was sending her children and her grandchildren north during the Great Migration. And it is a seasoning to the cake that's unbelievable. I mean, you read that poem and it connects you to their experience and their family, and it just shows how food and our life's experiences are intertwined, and as Kathy said, how women have used their kitchens as a grounding place and as first place of community. And this is throughout the book. It's been really gratifying to talk to people who are reading the book, and the feedback of like, I pick up the pages and I don't know what I'm going to find, but it's something that moves me to think about what I'm baking or what I'm feeling at that time. And a lot of this book is actually, you know, what we're talking about is, you know, women's access to power and oppression and injustice. And so I just want you to know it's not all deep and earnest. There is a lot of humor in this book too. And, you know, Kathy and I had a lot of fun as we were putting it together with chapter titles, and I love recipe titles. And last, you know, April, when those wonderful gentlemen in Alabama legislated away women's right to choose, I called Kathy and I said, you know, we have to have a pig in a blanket.
And I know exactly who to dedicate it to. Those men, very well deserved. Part of the introduction to the book, in talking about the Kavanaugh trials, also talks about Susan Collins of Maine, who is my senator for a short while. And we dedicated a recipe to her. We have a wild Maine blueberry Supreme Court crumble. We have some, you will cry reading some of this book, and you will be furious reading some of it. Mostly what I hope the takeaway is, and something that Katherine and I found as we put this book together, is that the collection of voices in this book all together feels very powerful. And I can speak for myself. I started this project really in a state of rage. And by the time we were done and had met these women from around the country and tested their recipes and retested their recipes and heard their stories and done the interviews, I felt a real sense of hope. I felt that instead of being quieted and told to shush up, how many times did you hear that Hillary Clinton was shrill and too loud? Well, take a look what's going on in Washington. The definition of shrill is not Hillary Clinton. And the way that women get identified as being too loud. And what we found was that this collection of women coming together, their voices got louder and louder, but in a very hopeful, productive, almost beautiful way. And then, of course, there's all the delicious baked foods that you can.
And to be clear, we are definitely not telling people to go back into the kitchen and, like, you know, women belong in the kitchen. We wanted to take our skills as food writers and journalists and as cooks to say that, like, everyone has skills that they can bring to making change. And that was why it was important that this was a pro-social, different kind of a cookbook. And it's been one of the most gratifying projects I've ever worked on.
Same here, same here. We are happy to take your questions, and we are also happy to keep talking about this book, which I think, as Katherine said, you start to read a few pages and there's a recipe and then a beautiful photo. And then all of a sudden you'll be caught off guard because there'll be an interview with the musician Ani DeFranco, who I just got to through a friend and had the most incredible conversation with her about anger and women's rights and what it's like to raise a daughter after you've been this leading musician feminist. And then you turn the page and there's a Filipino flan recipe. And then you turn the page and there's a vintage photo. So we really wanted to try to keep people engaged, but also make it that you could bake something, and while it's in the oven and there's that wonderful lull when, okay, your kitchen's a mess, but you've just made a cake and or a pie or some cookies and you're so excited about it, and you can sit down and read one of these essays, and then you get the reward at the end.
And I'm looking at some of the chat questions, and I'm loving when Brigida is saying about, you know, she's a political activist, she was a legislative aide, and she wants to be a chef, and making that combination. And just one thing to say, go Bridget, Brigida, is go for it. One of the reasons why we chose Emily's list, which is to support women candidates, is because of what the name stands for, which a lot of people don't know, which is Emily's List, which stands for Early Money is Like Yeast. And I think we all know that now, as that, you know, it helps us rise. And so we really want to get more women's voices out there and use this. And as we found out, Kathy, the original starter of Emily's List was from Maine.
He was a baker in Maine. And I always thought it was Emily for an Emily, but Early Money is Like Yeast is a pretty terrific acronym. Yeah, so questions. Are there questions, Elizabeth?
There are. I'm going to take this brief moment to remind people that our events program is supported by book sales. If you go to gibsonsbookstore.com, the book is available on our website. As we are recording this, shipping is currently 99 cents on orders $20 or over. I will put the link into the description and the chat as well. I have a question here from Janine, who says, you mentioned making empanadas with the dough, so meats will work. But is there a meat that wouldn't do well?
I probably wouldn't make an empanada with, well, the first thing is like fish. I mean, some fish would work. Actually, that's not true. I've had delicious empanadas made from tuna, actually canned tuna in Mexico. So those are delicious. I've done it with, you know, there's a lot of braising going on in my house these days. So I had some braised turkey and I used that with a little bit of capers and stuck that in there. And you could do chicken that's left over or even ground meat. It's pretty adaptable. And they were, I mean, I thought like, oh, these are going to be, you know, I wasn't sure. And they were one of the most delicious things we've had over this amazing marathon of home COVID cooking.
I mean,
it's very adaptable.
Yeah, and one of the reasons we chose this recipe is that grocery shopping has gotten challenging, as you all know, and trying to figure out, you can't go into a grocery store the way you used to with a list or with 4 recipes you want to make, because not everything is available the same way it is. So this time is turning a lot of people into much more adaptive kind of cooks. And that's why we chose this pastry. You could open your pantry and your refrigerator right now, and let's just say you found an onion, and maybe you found half a zucchini, or even a cabbage. You could saute the zucchini and the cabbage, sprinkle a little bit of cheese in, saute the onion, and you'd have a gorgeous cabbage and onion and cheese galette. You could go in any direction. I'm finding that people I talk to during this pandemic seem to be on one side or the other. They're either like, I'm so busy between homeschooling my children, working, being on Zoom meetings, that there's even less time to cook and it's so chaotic. Or there are people, probably more older people, that their kids are gone or they never had kids, who are saying, I've never had this kind of time to cook, and I'm getting so into it and I'm learning so much and I'm really enjoying cooking in a way that I never have. Now, a lot of people just are used to takeout and going to restaurants or living on frozen food. And those days are temporarily halted. I say temporarily with air quotes and a lot of hope in my heart that these restaurants will come back and that we will pick up the economy and people can resume eating other people's foods. But if there were ever a time to try to bake and to try to cook more inventively, we are there.
I can also back up that this recipe works very well basically with your kitchen scraps, because when I was given This galette, like as I mentioned, it was from a tomato that was on its last day and frozen spinach that I dug out of the freezer. And I ate it on camera. I was not expecting to be eating and chewing with everybody watching me, but it was really good. So you can absolutely use up leftovers with this recipe.
And this would also become a perfect adaptation, you know, family repertoire, like Thanksgiving apple pie. You know, it goes it's knowing how to make pie dough and being comfortable with it will just open up a myriad of different things. And let's be clear, you know, if you don't want to do this and you had frozen pie crust that you bought at the store, you can do the same thing. I mean, we're not judging anyone here. Definitely. And this is, you know, there are many other pie recipes in the book. We've got some really like cool one. There's one for a pretzel crust pie. You know, that's using things that, there was someone as we were coming in who was eating pretzels. We have a recipe for pretzel crust, pie crust with a really delicious buttermilk orange marmalade filling. I mean, the recipes range from the most delicious buttermilk biscuits that you could ever have from a famous restaurant from Maxine Sue in San Francisco. There's an astonishing baklava from Reem Asil, a Palestinian woman in Oakland. I mean, the range of recipes, it's not what you're going to, it's not your regular cookbook, which was a real pleasure for us to put together.
Another seasonal recipe is in New England, parsnips are fresh right now because in New England, farmers winter their parsnips over and they harvest them in the spring. And a lot of people are like, I don't know what to do with them. I make cupcakes. There's a wonderful recipe in the book for spiced parsnip cupcakes. Think of a carrot cake, but you grate the parsnip instead of the carrot, and then it gets this luscious maple syrup icing on top, and that is really good spring food.
Yeah, oh, and then I'm gonna say the whole cake chapter, I mean, then there's another one, very pantry driven, called Don't Call Me Honey Cakes, cupcakes, which was truly fun for me to work on and make. And it uses yogurt, just plain yogurt that you would have in the refrigerator, and flour and butter. Okay, we did go through a lot of butter Kathy and I were taking our butter. We didn't count the pounds of butter, but we felt the pounds of butter. But the recipes, as we said, were really designed for people in their home kitchens. We couldn't have anticipated this, but they're very go-to, easy. Oh, and Kathy, talk about Ruth Reichel's cookie.
Oh, I was just thinking about also saying to invite your children into the kitchen with you if you are, you know, isolated and staying at home with young kids. There is no better way to teach math and science and English and reading and writing. But Ruth Reichel, the ex-editor of Gourmet and New York Times food critic, has an oatmeal cookie in this book that has 4 ingredients. It's gluten-free. And a friend of mine has a 3-year-old, and he called and said, okay, she's ready to rage bake. You know, it's been a day. What should we do? And I said, make the oatmeal cookies. And an hour later, he sent me this picture of her holding her plate of Ruth's oatmeal cookies. And that's how easy it is, but it is deeply satisfying. They're one of the best cookies I've ever tasted.
So we have a technical question here from Tamar. Kathy, what blade did you use on your food processor? And also, would a KitchenAid also work to make the dough instead of a food processor?
Absolutely. I use what is this thing called?
That's the metal blade.
Metal blade. Thank you very much. Technical answer there. But again,
I would not do it in a food I mean, I wouldn't do it in a food, I mean, a standing mixer. If you don't have a food processor, just go to the hand method, you know, knives and hands. Because what you use a food processor, I mean, a stand mixer, sorry, with the paddle, smooths the butter, right? I mean, it makes the butter creamy, which is the texture you want for a cookie or a cake, but not for a pie. The pie, you want those big pea-sized bits in there. The structure is a little different.
We have a question here from Alice and a question from Jessica. Alice asks, was there any recipe or story that really surprised you? Which I think ties also neatly with Jessica's question of how long from the inception of Rage Baking to completion did it take you to write the book?
I guess for the answer to the recipe question, Catherine, we'd have to do your pull-apart bread.
Oh yeah, okay. So, you know, a lot of times the inspiration for recipes when I'm recipe developing will come from all different sources. And, you know, as this was a politically motivated book, I was like, Kathy, we have to have a pull-apart bread, you know, and, you know, it's like a monkey bread, you know, you have the little things in there. And Kathy was like, okay, great. And so then I went on it, and then I went on it, and then I went on it, and I probably tested it. Well, I stopped counting, but I made spreadsheets, and I did this because I knew, like, I didn't want it to be like overly complicated, and yeast recipes sometimes can be that way. And well, Kathy was really like going to do an intervention.
Started getting very worried about her because she sent the recipe, I tested it, I said it's great, and she's like, I want to tweak it a little bit more. So when I say that these recipes work and have been retested a bit obsessively sometimes, I think also to answer the question, I would say that often the simplest recipes like Ruth's oatmeal cookie, Betty Fussell, a 93-year-old food writer from California who is just an icon and a role model, sent us this beautiful molasses spice cookie, just very straightforward and simple, but the kind of cookie where you take a bite and then you stop and you're like, wow, this is a full experience. Ginger, cinnamon, nutmeg, allspice, cardamom, just delicious. And I think people think about baking that they need to go to baking school or they need to be the baker in the family. But the idea of this book is that we draw you in with these very simple cookies. There is also a chocolate cake, a 3-layered chocolate cake in here with raspberries and whipped cream, the kind of cake that will take you many hours, but it's the cake for the special birthday or anniversary. And then the recipes offer everything in between. So I guess what I want to do is urge you to not judge yourself as a baker, but to be open to this and to try these recipes and see how very easy it can be. I'm not the kind of person that draws within the line. You know, I'm a kind of like, oh, let's try this, which is why I love savory cooking. But I became really intrigued and almost hooked on the science and the rule following of bakery. If you cream your butter properly, if you take it out of the refrigerator and let it come to room temperature, if you follow these simple rules, you will be rewarded hugely.
And to answer the question about how long it took to put this book together, that's a good question, because most people, when they do a cookbook, they have like a year and all this sort of stuff. We knew we wanted this book to come out and be a tool for the 2020 election. We didn't realize how much of a tool it would be needed for the well, we had a pretty good idea, but no one could have anticipated this. So from start to finish of, you know, sending out those queries, would you like to be part of this book? And to all the testing and writing was basically 3 months, which
can happen, yeah, in less than 6 months, which most cookbooks take a minimum of a year.
Yeah.
So it was fast because we had this agenda to have it be, we imagined we would be out in the world touring. We wanted to develop a new 2020 vision for a bake sale, encourage people to try to bake things and raise money for local candidates, for women candidates. Well, we didn't know the whole world was going to be turned upside down even more. But here we are, and we still have the right to vote, and we still have the right to use our voices, and we still have the right to bake.
We have a question here from Valerie. Will you tell us about the tahini chocolate chip cookies?
I will indeed.
Flavor?
Yeah, thank you for asking, Valerie. We knew we wanted a chocolate chip cookie because you got to have a chocolate chip cookie, but we didn't want the same old, just as this book is not kind of the same old. So I am not a fan of peanut butter in sweet things. Call me weird. I only like peanut butter in savory foods. I know, no one really, there are very few people that agree with me, but I love tahini, which are ground sesame seeds and used a lot in Israeli and Mediterranean cooking. And I thought, what if I made a tahini What if I made a chocolate chip cookie with big chunks of chocolate and then that nutty, smooth, creamy butteriness of tahini? So it's a chocolate chip cookie with tahini. It's sprinkled with sesame seeds. And then as soon as they come out of the oven, they get kind of crispy on the edges and soft in the middle. You sprinkle them with coarse sea salt, because salt and chocolate are very good friends. And that is one of my personal favorites, and seems to be a cookie people are making over and over.
Definitely.
We have some technical questions here. Do you use a specific brand of butter? Do you have opinions about salted versus unsalted kind of butter? And
well, right now, when we go to the store, I'll take whatever butter I can get. But when you're baking, I definitely advocate for using unsalted butter. I like salted butter like on bread or like when I make mashed potatoes. But if I have only one kind of butter to work with, it's going to be unsalted butter. And it's, there's so many great butters out there. I love Irish butters. I love European cultured butters, which have a little bit of a tang to it.
But such a New Yorker, we can't get any of that.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not going to be fancy pants about it. New York is doing it 7 o'clock.
Oh, yay.
That's been, it's kind of amazing. So unsalted butter, pretty much the go-to people you go to is Land O'Lakes or whatever you have, a local butter that you like. Just the temperature is important that you have, and we have great tips for all this technical stuff. Every chapter, it's organized by like cookies, cakes, breads, pies, and in each one we'll have, what you really like, the basic fundamentals to help you be a better baker in each one of those categories.
I just want to say one really quick thing. I'm sure you've all noticed that flour and yeast are very scarce in supermarkets, and people are constantly texting me, do you know where I can get flour? Do you know where, it's like the new drugs. And yeast, you have yeast, my God. Was I not supposed to say that, Elizabeth? Anyway, I think what's going on is that baking is happening on a level that maybe has never happened in home kitchens across this country. Bakeries are shuttered. There's more and more takeout opening. But if you want bread in most places, you have to make it. So it's never been a better time to learn to be a better baker. And the flour will be back, and the yeast will be back, and hopefully we'll all be back. And I hope everybody's staying healthy and well.
And can I just say, I really want to thank Elizabeth. You have been so supportive of this and of us doing this event, and saying just because we're isolated, and we can't get out, we're going to do this event. And she's been terrific, and to really how important it is right now to support local bookstores. This is the time to really do your thing, buy local. We know the big A, you can get everything on a delayed, but it's these local businesses that need our support, whether it's for buying butter or books or whatever it is you need. Please support your local businesses. This is your community, and they are supporting us.
I will say on the subject of local, we have a local bakery, the Crust and Crumb, who was not expecting me to give a little shout out here tonight, but they're actually doing deliveries twice a week right now. And because they have, if you can't find butter or flour or yeast right now, they have restaurant supply chains. So they will not only deliver bread and cake, which may or may not be what I ordered, but they will deliver flour. They will deliver yeast. They had bacon. They're like, do you want bacon? Do you want eggs? They have all these supply chains that are different from grocery store supply chains. On top of that, they also had toilet paper on that. They'll deliver toilet paper to you. Like they'll drop it on your doorstep for you. It's great. Let's have one more question here. So I will say one last time, please buy the book from us, your host bookstore, Gibson's Bookstore tonight. The events program is supported by book sales, gibsonsbookstore.com, and again in the description. One last question here to take us out of this. Let's see, I think it was Pamela who was saying this. What are you both having for dinner tonight? throw if you haven't already eaten?
I'm having a galette with apples and pancetta and a nice big salad. And I have to say, a little special thing about this galette is my friend Kathy Gunst made ramp salt, and I sprinkled a little bit of the ramp salt on top, so it's super delicious. But I'm having this for dinner.
And we are having local Maine scallops, which we were lucky enough to get from a fish store that brought the food out to the car for us so that we didn't have to go into the store. But I can certainly tell you what I'm having for dessert, which I might start with, really.
There are no rules anymore, honestly. I mean, have your
Seriously.
first.
What day is it?
I mean, thank goodness for Google reminders to tell me, hey, you have an event tonight. You should wash your hair.
I also wanted to say thank you, and I also wanted to tell people how generous it is of Gibson's to only charge 99 cents to ship the books out, because you know what? There's no reason to go to those big stores, and support independence, and just thank you so much for pulling this together.
It's been great fun.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out tonight for Gibson's Bookstore virtual events. Thank you to Kathy Gunst. Thank you to Catherine Alford. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us tonight. Happy baking, stay safe, and we'll see you again. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bake on, bake on.